Brian Emmanuel Maina says his childhood experiences drove him to the brink and he almost took his own life.
Speaking up is one thing that saved my life. If I had not done so, I wouldn't be here right now, speaking up on behalf of my peers about this greatly shunned and stigmatized topic.
Thousands of Kenyans are facing the same predicament, 4 of them succumbing to the pressures every day. Health CAS Rashid Aman noted that stresses have escalated due to harsh economic times caused by the COVID-19 pandemic.
And everybody has a role in this endeavor. This includes encompassing mental health, social, economic, and community factors through an integrated framework as well as individual concerted efforts.
He said to achieve a comprehensive public health and action to prevent suicide, especially among young people, there is need to sensitize the population and vulnerable groups on mental health care.
While we fully acknowledge that suicide is an intricate yet preventable public health problem, we need to do the best we can to deal with these problems.
The government launched the Mental Health Action Plan, a roadmap to a mentally healthy nation. According to the World Health Organization, every 40 seconds, someone in the world takes their own life. Globally, suicide is the 4th leading cause of death among 15 to 29-year-olds.
Now, according to the World Health Organization, more than 700,000 people die due to suicide every year, and for every suicide, there are many more people who attempt suicide. It is important to note that suicide is the 4th leading cause of death in 15 to 19-year-olds, and 77% of global suicides occur in low and middle income countries. Have you ever had any suicide thoughts?
Of course, I've ever had something like suicide. At one point, I had a situation that I kill myself. Mostly, I think it is a family issue, difference in the family. You find that maybe you are reasoning, you don't read from the same script from whoever where you are living with.
In my life, I've never thought of taking my life, and because generally I know it is sin when you take your life, because my life was given to me by God, and therefore I have no right to take it away. But I've heard of friends who have been depressed and they have had such thoughts, and maybe through counseling and family guidance, some of them left, and unfortunately I have one friend who at the end of the day committed suicide because of depression.
I've never had suicidal thoughts because life gets better either way. Yeah, something will come up, something good. So
2008, when my family passed away because of the violent election, I was having a mental illness. So I decided to take a rope and then go into the Gong forest to hang myself.
I've never had a suicide thought, but I have had friends who, at one point or the other, had kinda disclosed that they were stressed or depressed.
What triggers thoughts of suicide? Welcome to your Health and Purity Museo. To help us with that discussion, Elmard Rigan is our guest, and of course he is a counseling psychologist. It's good to have you to this show tonight.
Thank you, Purity.
Yes, and allow me to ask you, is it normal to have suicide thoughts?
Well, I wouldn't say it's normal to have suicide thoughts because logically speaking, a functioning human being, when I say functioning, I mean somebody that their thoughts, their perception, their judgment, their feelings, their emotions are all in check, then it wouldn't be something normal for somebody to have suicidal thoughts. What could be normal, say for example, is to feel stress or feel overwhelmed. But then now when it tends to gravitate towards being suicidal, then there's a problem. So it's not normal to have suicidal thoughts. Yeah, it's normal to feel fatigued, tired, worn out, you know, you don't want to do nothing. But when it tends to go towards suicidal stuff, there's a problem.
So any thought about suicide, you know, when you think about ending your life, and you have to know you have a problem and you need help.
Definitely.
Okay, so what triggers suicide thoughts? And before you answer that, maybe, what does being suicidal mean? Yes.
All right, so I'll start with the last question. What does being suicidal mean? So being suicidal is an attempt to take one's life. And you see, it's a whole cycle. Just also cap up the second question. Because somebody does not just wake up and say, I'm going to commit suicide tomorrow, and that's it. There is, first of all, what you call pre-contemplation. This person thinks about it as, by there I could commit suicide because whatever I'm going through is not easy to handle or to manage for that reason. So after the pre-contemplation, they go ahead now to contemplate. They go ahead and think of the place, the time, the method they'll use, and all these dynamics. Then from the contemplation, they now go ahead to do the actual planning. Say, for example, they want to use a rope, they'll acquire a rope. Say they want to do it via a gun, they'll acquire a gun. Say they want to drown, they look for a water body and go ahead and execute their ideation of suicide. And then there's, of course, the final act that is now the suicide itself. Yeah. So suicide in itself, it's an idea that comes to somebody's mind intentionally because you're feeling I have this burden, I have this overwhelm that I want to take away from my life. And the only easy way out for me is to take my own life. Yes.
And you're saying that when you are stressed, you don't have to be suicidal. So what triggers suicide if it's not stress? Maybe is it some level of stress or depression that, you know, is it, and you said that it's intentional. You know, can you clarify on that?
Right.
Yeah.
So when I say it's intentional, it's because you have thought about it for a while. Yeah, and you see, you don't just do things because you want to do things. Say, for example, the moment you leave your house in the morning, there's an agenda that you want to achieve for that day. You don't just leave, I'm going, to town or I'm going to meet a friend without an agenda. So same with suicide. Somebody has to be intentional about it because by and large, the suicidal thoughts, they are triggered by, of course, stress and depression. But the problem is, if this stressor is not handled, then it can gravitate towards one being suicidal. All right. So in as much as stress may lead one to be suicidal, but it's the question of how is the stress handled and managed. Because different people handle stress differently. All right. What I perceive as dangerous could be different from what you perceive as dangerous. That's why I'm saying it's intentional because it varies from person to person. So in as much as stress and other things like depression, which we're going to discuss further, gravitate or rather increase the rates of one being suicidal are there. It's a question of how is it handled so that it doesn't get to a level of one being suicidal. Yes.
And the global statistics show that suicide cases are, common among the 15 to 19-year-olds.
Yes.
Maybe what is the statistics or how common is suicide cases in Kenya?
Right. So going by the recent statistics, I think one of the local ladies was citing between the months of March and June, about 480 plus people took their lives. And the question, of course, is why these young thugs, why the young generation, 15-year-olds, I mean, that's somebody who is probably still in high school. Why would they think of them taking their own lives? And for me here, I look at the gap in terms of parenting and the role of parenting. Because by and large, this age group, 15-year-olds to 19-year-olds, or even sometimes 29-year-olds, that's the phase in life where they're trying to identify who they really are, what they want to do with themselves and their lives. And if they don't grasp it quite well, they look for other avenues to gratify that gap in them that they want to identify with. All right? So if they don't get that answer from, say, parents or caregivers or even teachers for that reason, they end up second guessing. So whom can I get this guidance or this assistance to know who I am from? So they'll resort to media, some to violence, some to crime, some to sexual, dangerous sexual escapades, just to fit in and get to know their true identity. So when this link misses, they find out that, okay, I resorted to drugs, but it's not fun, it's not healthy. I resorted to violence, but it's very dangerous. So they're stressed and bombarded with all these issues. So they're like, okay, fine, I've messed up. What do? Take a rope, hang myself. Because if I tell anyone that I have this problem, most probably they'll judge me or they'll see me in this or that way.
Right.
And that explains why that age bracket is more likely to commit suicide as a result of the problems they go through.
And you mentioned parenting as a bigger,
yes,
challenge in the country or globally right now. But most people will say, we'll talk of peer pressure, social media. Maybe let's talk about what are the triggers, what can really make someone to think about ending their life. Yeah.
All right, so it's true that there are also other variables like the social media, the peers and friends and colleagues and all these things. And it's true that society has a part to play. Now, still in reference to the young people, I'd still insist on the role of parenting because that's the core. Whenever a child is born, the first point of contact they have with is their parents or their caregivers. Whenever they're not home, they've started schooling, the next parent they know is the teacher. And so it is assumed by most parents that teachers will teach them something about their mental health. The teachers will assume that's the role of the parent. So there's a disconnect. So this young person is left in some sort of catch-22 situation. Do I listen to my parents? Do I listen to my teachers? And that brings a whole lot of conflict for this young person. So for me, really, the gap and where we need to focus attention more is on matters parenting. Notwithstanding the other issues that will, increase one's chances of being suicidal or rather take their own lives, like things like social media and just the social pressure and the culture to fit in. That because person XYZ has this type of car, I need to also match up and get it, not knowing what they went through to get that car. All right? So in as much as these other variables exist, I'll still insist on the core, that is parenting.
Because the larger group that is actually affected is the teenagers,
Very true.
15 to 19.
Yes.
So we have suicide, attempted suicide, parasuicide. Do these three mean the same? Do they have the same traits, or one leads to the other?
Okay.
Yeah,
so they are different. As I mentioned, suicide in itself is the intentional act of taking one's own life as a result of a perceived difficulty in your life, all right? Then there is attempted suicide. Now, attempted suicide is a bit different. Attempted suicide is, again, intentional. Of course, the idea or the agenda is to end your life. But somewhere midway, you don't die, either because the method you chose for suicide didn't work out or just something happened in between that didn't lead to death. So it's an attempt, it didn't quite succeed, just as the word suggests, okay? And then we have the last one, which is parasuicide. Now, parasuicide is a little bit more interesting in the sense that the outlook would seem like somebody wants to take their own lives, yes, but the agenda, the idea is not to end your life, okay? The idea here is trying to reach out for help. Say, for example, I'll take six pills in the attempt to end my life. It may not be enough. But what am I doing really? I want to reach out and say, hey guys, I'm suffering, I'm in need here, somebody hear me out. So it's more or less an attempt to reach out for help, but not in the right way. So maybe you will sometimes try and say, bruise yourself, injure yourself, just to show that I'm in need here. So the idea with parasuicide is not really to end your life, but to reach out for help, to say that I'm suffering, somebody hear me out.
And these
Though sometimes,
people,
so
yes.
pretty short, sometimes it can lead to suicide if no intervention is put in place. Yeah.
Do all, cases begin from the parasuicide? Because, or do we have extreme cases that someone just with no signs, I know you'll be telling us signs of a suicide, how to identify someone who is suicidal, but does it all begin from parasuicide and then if these people are not getting the kind of help that they want, then they end up, committing suicide?
Most of them, I'd say, start from parasuicide because, as I mentioned earlier, looking at the mind of a suicidal person, they'll first of all pre-contemplate, and then they'll contemplate, plan, and then execute. So majority of them start from, the level of, yes, I want help, but nobody's listening to me. I said that by the I'm stressed, I need this and this, to be sorted. They're like, you're going to be fine. You're a strong person. Then the next time, okay, they're not listening to me. Let me try bruise myself. Let me try cut myself. Let me try take pills and see if anybody will take notice. Yes.
So are these people who are suicidal, can they be identified? Do we have signs and symptoms? Are you able to tell that, this person, if not helped, then they may end up doing something not so good to to themselves?
True. So for some people, they'll show signs that they're suicidal. Some will not be very clear. You might confuse them actually for a mental health disorder, But generally, if somebody openly speaks about death repeatedly, it's a cause for alarm because, it's not normal. Fine, we have death in our lives and it's there, it's a fact. But if somebody repeatedly speaks about it time and again, then it could be a point of concern. Number two, if this person all of a sudden starts becoming so withdrawn from society, from activities, from friends, it's a cause for alarm. Say, for example, you want to call them out for dinner or for coffee or for something. They're like, oh, I'm busy, there's something I'm working on. Even that they are free, they're not really doing nothing, but they're just like, I'm busy, I'm working on something. Could be a sign. Some people will go ahead and do posts on social media about death or give very interesting quotes surrounding death and the concept of death repeatedly. And if you keenly notice or check, they're always at intervals that are specific. Say if they post at 6 in the morning, it's always around that time that they post. all right? Some people will go ahead and give away prized material possession. Say, for example, somebody had this huge parcel of land and they decide, you know what, I'm going to give my total lead out. For no good reason, really. They're not terminally ill that they're going to die the next day, but they just decide, I'm going to give away my car, going to give away my title deed. Not that there's anything wrong with that, but just from nowhere, they want to give out, you know, whatever they own because they feel, I mean, there's nothing left for me. So it's better I give whatever I have and go. Eating habits are equally affected. Some people either will not eat well, some will indulge in eating, what we call binge eating. Some will have sleep disorders or disturbed sleep patterns. Either they sleep very little or they sleep too much. Yeah, so looking at these signs combined, you could say that this person actually needs help, or I guess they could be having suicidal thoughts or,
and
attempting to take their lives.
lately we've been seeing people, they take the lives of their loved ones and end up committing suicide as well. Where do we categorize this? And it's really becoming common, especially in the country. What could be the possible cause for, you know, taking someone else's life and then you also end up taking your own life as well? What kind of suicide is this in the first place? Yeah.
So this is a very interesting one because, say, for example, you have some disagreement with somebody and you decide I'm going to end their lives. Some of these people use it as an avenue to take their lives. They'll spark up an argument, kill the other person, then also end their life just to justify why they had to take their lives, all right? So they'll use this other person as the scapegoat for the problem and then end up taking their own lives, all right? So it's a bit tricky, honestly, sometimes to understand because, I mean, if only we could try get in their minds and get to understand what really happened, it could be easy, but then, I mean, they are then dead. So we can only be left guessing or point links that these people had a disagreement or they had some sort of commotion among them. And so one of them decided, I'm going to shoot the other person or kill the other person. Then, because I feel I have nothing left, I'll also take my life. Some still, they don't really intend to, you know, commit suicide, but because of the guilt that comes with killing the other person, they're like, you know what, there's nothing left for me, let me also follow suit.
Yeah. And how do we help a suicidal person, you know, prevention at a personal level if you feel stressed? At what point are you able to recognize if this is not, if I don't seek help here, then I may end up with these thoughts? And combine that with how do we help people who show signs and symptoms of suicide?
All right. So from the get-go, when we seek to help people, or rather when you want to help yourself, should be having stressors that, you know, really weigh you down. It's very important to be open about it. Open up to somebody. Say if you are married, open up to your colleague or rather to your spouse if you feel comfortable with them. If not, I'm sure we all have a friend or two who can listen to us. Now, the idea behind opening up is so that the other person is in the know, so that they'll always check on you. Because a suicidal person thinks that nobody cares about them, nobody wants to listen to what they say, nobody checks up on them, so they say, okay, they'll conclude that fine, I'm alone in this boat and I'm fighting this alone. So I'll insist much on the idea of opening up as much as you can whenever you have a problem, be it at the workplace, speak with your HR manager. If it's at home, speak to your dad, mom, your spouse, your children, speak to them, let them know. If it's at, say, a religious setting, in the church, in the mosque, in the temple, whichever place, there are those leaders who are there to at least see you through the process. Don't die with it alone. Now, to help our brothers and sisters who are maybe suicidal, what we can do is what we call in counseling, giving them unconditional positive regard. That means you take them as they are, all right? Because they need assistance, they need help. And the moment you take them as they are, they'll open up more and they'll embrace the idea of being assisted because they want to be listened to. They want empathy, not really sympathy. Because the moment you be sympathetic, they're like, okay, fine, so what next after that, all right? So be open to them, to the idea of counseling and let them know the essence. But still there's caution here. In as much as you want to be free and open with them and accept them as they are, also don't overdo it so much. Otherwise, they'll feel like I'm burdensome, you know, I'm this way person that I'm not going to be assisted very easily. So strike a balance. Yes, work with them, but also give them some time to also stabilize. Don't leave them just hanging by themselves.
Okay. Yeah. And as a society, to prevent cases of suicide and people taking their lives, you said there is a role we need to play. Maybe you can emphasize on this as we wind up.
Yeah, sure. Yeah. So for me, I think we can start from the very basic units of the society, that is the family. Let it start from the home. The moment a child is born and they start, you know, to learn how to, you know, go about their lives, it should be more deliberate from the parents' end to speak to their child about whatever problems or issues they have, right from home. When they transition to school, it should be the same. Whenever they're going to their religious settings or meetings, should be the same. Whenever they're in the workplace or other, in their businesses, it should be the same. Whenever they are in, say, their social spheres, maybe watching soccer, maybe, just hanging out, having a drink or two, let it be commonplace to speak about issues that affect the mental health. Because unfortunately, most mental health issues, if not sorted, most of them end up in either suicide or extreme cases of depression. So the more we're deliberate about speaking about the scourge of suicide in our social life, the better it is. Yes.
Okay, thank you so much. I think we have to wind up, but thank you for this conversation. Of course, the world is marking the Suicide Prevention Awareness Week, and it was important to have this. But most importantly, you said speak out.
Definitely.
Elmard Rigan, thank you so much. It's always great having you here.
Pleasure. Thank you.
That's all the time we had for Your Health. Thank you so much for watching. I'm Purity Museo. I'll see you again next week for yet another episode of Your Health. For now, we leave you with the tips on suicide prevention. Stay safe.